This morning's lesson is I know my sheep and they know my voice. John chapter 10 and verse 27. John chapter 10 and verse 27. Jesus proclaims, "My sheep hear my voice and I know them and they follow me." What does that exactly mean? We are the sheep of the flock, and we are supposed to know His voice and know that it comes from Him. So when we hear some strange doctrine or some strange teaching, we know that's not the voice of Jesus. And we should know our scriptures well enough to know the voice of Jesus. I once read a story of a watering hole in the Bible land where several shepherds had congregated together, and they just happened to show up at this water hole. They kind of tend to water their flocks at the same time, and they all gathered together, and one of them was there feeding his flock, and another one came in, and then another one, and they had, these sheep were all just intermingled amongst the water hole, and the shepherds just backed off and stood back, and they talked about their day. They'd been alone for half a day or a week or whatever, and it was a time for them to come together and fellowship with one another while their sheep were watering. And as they were standing there talking, a couple of sheep started wandering out away from the water hole. They were finished drinking, and so the one shepherd, said goodbye to them, and he started walking out, and the sheep started following him. One by one, all of his sheep went off with him, and the other sheep stayed there. And then another shepherd, he goes and he takes his and he starts calling them, and they follow him off, and pretty soon they had all gone their separate ways, and all the sheep were separated. They didn't have to worry about separating them, because as the shepherd would call out the names of the sheep or call out his voice and call them to him, they would all follow him. And the other sheep wouldn't follow him. They didn't mix up, because each one of the sheep knew who their shepherd was and who they were going to follow. And they followed that shepherd. It was a very interesting story. So there are many voices that call us away from the flock of God and from the good shepherd, but true followers of Jesus know His voice, and we will know that. And sometimes you may have an opportunity to travel. We don't get to travel as much as we used to. I grew up in a family that my dad had vacation twice a year, and one vacation we spent fishing at Rockport, and the other vacation we spent hunting. And so that was our vacations growing up. We didn't travel a lot. My wife came from a well-traveled family. She spent time in Singapore. They were all over the country, and she was always telling me, "I really want to go to Louisiana. I really want to go here. I want to go there," and wanted to travel. And she's quite rubbed off on me. I've traveled to lots of places, and which made it good for when I went to preaching school. We had to go to places and talk to them about support, and got to know many, many congregations. And if you ever get an opportunity to do that, do it. Take the chance and get to know the people and get to know congregations. And so if someone says, "I'm looking for a place to worship. I'm going to be down in Port Aransas, or I'm going to be up in Maine," wherever, you could say, there's a good group of people right here, and there's a flock of Jesus there. There's a good congregation of God's people in this area, and you can go there. Because once you think about this, once we get to heaven, we're all going to know each other. Some of you I met, and I don't remember your names. And some of you I've seen you yesterday and today, but I don't know you. I haven't met you yet. But I'll know you there. Even if I walk out of this building today and never see you again this side of heaven, I'll know you there. And we know that from what we see in the Bible when they recognize Abraham and Elijah having never seen them. So we think about the voices. How many people today have left the flock and gone after false doctrines, have gone after false leaders, or followed off into these leaders that are leading them astray, so to speak? One day, one of the members come up to me, and they had a little newspaper clipping, and she handed this to me and said, "I thought you would find this interesting." And this woman, I would expect that this article would have come from a Time magazine or from a denominational newsletter or something like that. And she hands me this and says, "I thought you would like this." And so I cut this out, but I thought about you when I read it. And I read it, and it was a very interesting article. And I kept it for a long, long time, and I've had it in kind of on a little nightstand thing. And it's just been an interesting story. It really fit in. It really fit in with this article. It turns out it was written by a member of the Church of Christ. It says, a man and his wife were taking a bus tour through Israel's countryside. As they listened to their tour guide, he included a heartwarming portrayal of the ancient shepherd and sheep relationship. The guide expounded on how the shepherd builds a relationship with his sheep and how he gently cares for them. The guide pointed out that the shepherd does not drive the sheep, but he leads them. And then that shepherd does not need to be harsh with them because they hear his voice and they follow him. In the midst of the pastoral tale, he suddenly realized that he had lost the attention of all of his tour. They were all staring out the bus window at a person chasing a group of sheep. The man was throwing rocks at the sheep, whacking them with sticks, and his dog was nipping at the sheep's heels. The man in the field had torpedoed the guy's enchanting narrative about the sheep and their shepherd. The tour guide was so upset that he stopped the bus and he ran out into the field and he accosted the man. Do you understand what you have just done to me? I was telling how the shepherds are gentle with their sheep and how they lead their sheep and how they talk to their sheep and how they know their sheep. And here you are mistreating and assaulting these sheep. What is going on? For a moment, the bewildered man had a frozen look on his face, and then a light dawned on him, and he blurted out, "You don't understand, sir. I am not the shepherd. I'm the butcher." Sometimes what we see is not what is really going on. The shepherd actually does lead the sheep. So the tour guide's story was really, really good, and he can really lead the sheep. And we see this, and we have to make application. John chapter 10 and verse 11. John chapter 10, verse 11. Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep." Now you think about David, when he was going to go up against Goliath, what was his first reaction? Goliath, the king said, "You can't do this. You're just a kid, and this guy's a man of war from his youth up. Look at him." And he says, "Look, let me tell you something. I was watching my father's sheep." Okay. "I went up against a lion and against a bear, and I slew them and took the sheep from them." He's basically saying, look, you know what kind of man I am? You ever have somebody tell you that, guys? Somebody said, "Well, yeah, I'm construction worker, I'm this, or I'm that." That loans credence to what they do. Yeah, I'm this, I'm a powerful guy. I mentioned it this past week in my sermon that it sometimes preachers get a bad mark against them. I was in the construction business and manufacturing business. I ran a manufacturing business for about 15 years, managed it, and did everything. I was their guy. I was the guy that you do this and you fix this, and something's broke, take it to Jim. Something's messed up, take it to Jim. Call Jim, get Jim out here. Whatever department Jim fixes it. But when I became a preacher, people were saying, "You need help changing that tire? I can come help you. You need help with that? Here, let me do that for you." Because the natural assumption is he's a preacher, he doesn't know how to do anything. He's only preaching because he can't do anything else, you know. So surely he needs some help. So when preachers kind of get a bad rap, when someone thinks they don't think he's got this real manly job. What does he do? He's a preacher. No, that doesn't work, right? We think of manly jobs, and there's all kinds of jobs that we think of. These extreme fisherman jobs and all of those things, and we see those have been brought up in these TV shows and stuff like that. But in this time, it was a shepherd. Why? All he does is take care of sheep, right? Sheep are docile animals. All he does is, come on, let's go. And he just wanders around and lets them eat and wanders around. No, but he has to take on anything and everything that wants to eat a sheep. For whatever reason, a lot of things want to eat a sheep. I don't know if you've ever messed with sheep. They don't smell too good, but things want to eat them. Lions, bears, whatever, coyotes, wolves, anything wants to eat the sheep. So I'm a shepherd. I can stand up. I stood up to those. So I qualify to go against Goliath because I was a shepherd. Jesus says in verse 14 of John chapter 10, "I am the good shepherd and know my sheep and am known of mine." I know my sheep and am known of mine. So the lesson is, I know my sheep and they know my voice. Do we know him? And does he know us? Do you know who you are? Does he really know who you are? I talked about that last night. These two passages carry much more weight than is at first seen. Does the phrase, I am the good shepherd, imply that there were or are bad shepherds? I would venture to say yes. I would have to say it does. Verse 12 and 13 of the same chapter. But he that is an hireling and not the shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming and leaveth the sheep and fleeth, and the wolf catcheth them and scattereth the sheep. The hireling fleeth because he is a hireling and careth not for the sheep. You think about this, taking care of somebody else's stuff as opposed to taking care of your own stuff. I was always taught to treat other people's stuff better than you treat your own. That's not the case in the world. Most people, I don't know. And we think about this. When we have our children in schools, if you have your children in public schools, we treat your kids like our own kids. I'm sure most of them would grab their kids first before they're fire. They're going to take care of your kids, but they're still not their kids. And we see that with our children or with our animals or whatever. The difference is that the hireling is tending the sheep out of obligation while he's simply doing what he was hired to do. And the shepherd, he has stake in the sheep. That's his livelihood, and he has to take care of them. He gives his life for the sheep. I can't think of that. It's just kind of foreign to me. I can't imagine someone saying, "Yeah, what happened to Doyle?" Well, someone was getting his chickens, and he went out there to fight them, and they killed him. The coyotes killed him because he was trying to save them chickens, though. Gave his life for them. I'd be like, I'll kill the coyote later, but you can have that chicken. I'm not going to die for it. I'm not going to give my life for giving our lives for something that's kind of extreme. You think about Jesus giving his life for us. We can understand that. We can wrap our minds around that. Why? Because it benefits us. But to think that one of us would give our life for a sheep, I don't know. I'm not sure. Sheep are different animals. I can remember when I was in high school, one of my friends raised a sheep for 4-H, and he was a big guy. He was 255 pounds when we were in 8th grade. So he was a big guy, didn't move real fast, and I was nimble and small. I could run and jump and was really quick. And he was a late child of his parents. He was born after most of his siblings were grown, and so his parents were the age of my grandparents. And he called me and said, "Hey, man, I need you to come help me. My dad and I were trying to catch this sheep. He got out. I can't catch him." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, I'll come help you." So I got over there, and we started chasing this sheep around the yard. And he said, "If we could just run him down the fence line, Dad will grab him and put him in the pen." And like, his dad was old, and he was a big guy, but he was old. And I got that sheep going, and he flagged him on, and I'm running behind him, and man, he's running down the fence line. This is going to work out perfect. And I see his dad step over in front of that sheep, and he stands there like this. And I thought, he's going to grab him. And he gets down, he's ready to grab this sheep. And that sheep, about 8 or 10 feet before he got to him, that sheep put his head down, and he launched himself off the ground. And he hit my friend's dad square in the chest with his head, with his full force. And the sheep goes, bam, hits the ground. He picked him up, he throws him over the fence, and he says, "Got him, thanks." I learned a new respect for my friend's dad. That sheep hit him with all he had, and it just hit the ground and didn't do anything. But it was very difficult trying to drive that sheep because he wasn't having any of that. And you try to call him, he wasn't having any of that either. So I don't know what different is when you have a flock. It's probably different. But to give your life for the sheep is a different thing altogether. He cares for them out of love. He's willing to die to save them. And what amazing correlation that the Savior draws between himself and this shepherd. Now, were any of us here today to see a man in the field with a flock of sheep, we may or may not know whether he's the shepherd just by the way he walks. Now, if he's wearing Eastern garb with a staff and a hook on it, we might say, yeah, he looks just like a shepherd from what I've seen in the pictures, but we may not know whether he's the shepherd or the butcher if he's just out there with the sheep. He may just be out there taking photographs or something. However, the people of Jesus' audience, they would have known very well who the shepherd was and what the shepherd does, and they would certainly be able to relate to a story of a shepherd. Remember, they still believe that David is the greatest king they ever had or will have, and David was a good shepherd. Again, as he volunteered to go against Goliath, Saul questioned him. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 34 and 35. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 34 and 35. It says, And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep. There came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him. That's a pretty brave guy, right? And we always think of David as a shepherd boy, as 10 or 11 years old. I seriously doubt that is. And historically, they've kind of figured he was older than that, but he was still pretty young. David was tending his father's sheep and was willing to die for those sheep. They belonged to his father, and he wanted to make sure he took care of his father's sheep. And you think about this, Jesus being the good shepherd, and he's taking care of his father's sheep, which is the church, which is us. Very, very strong parallel there. Jesus wasn't willing to die for his father's sheep, just willing to die for his father's sheep. He did die for his father's sheep. He went to the cross and died for us. So Jesus, as the good shepherd, has this flock of sheep, and they know his voice. How does that relate to us? We know the voice of the good shepherd, then we won't be tossed to and fro about every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men and the cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive us, Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 14. But how do we know the voice of the good shepherd? How do we find that voice? How do we know it? Well, how do the sheep know the voice of their shepherd? They hear the voice, right? How do they know? At my house, I live in a little country subdivision just outside of town. And we moved in there, and I thought, man, this is great. There's a lot of deer out in this area. I always hear about these deer out, lots of deer out in Great Oak. So we're going to move out there. We bought a piece of property, cleared a lot of it to make a house and build a house. And I left all this native brush. First month we were there, I look out and I see these deer, and they're feeding on this native brush. Man, look at that. That's what they like to eat. I'll leave all of it here as much as I can. So we'll have a lot of deer here. And it got to where every once in a blue moon, I would tell my wife, guess what? What? I saw tracks. A deer must have come through here sometime last night or something. There's actually deer came through here. A couple of years passed, never seeing any deer. There's deer around. I see them hit on the road. And I said, this place is a mess. I'm cleaning all this brush out. I've had enough of it. It doesn't attract the deer. The deer aren't coming in. It's not helping. I'm clearing it all out. So we had a bobcat, and we pulled brush, and we dug, and we pulled, and we cleared. And we cleared out the whole front of the place and left just the trees, took out all the brush, clear all the way to the road. We worked a whole Saturday piling up brush and burning brush, and we actually worked for a couple of weeks. But this one Saturday, we worked clearing brush. Got in the car and went to worship that morning and came home, got this big open area, and if we pull in there, there's about 15 deer out there laying around. Thank y'all for clearing that. That's what we've been waiting for. So now they're a permanent fixture on my property. I have about 22 of them that I feed, and I give them a little scoop of corn and protein every single day, and I walk it out there and feed them. In the evenings, I feed them, and my wife will feed them the whole thing if she has a chance. She makes sure they get fed if I'm not there. And every morning, I go out there. Sometimes they're laying around when I walk out, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes you can't see them. They're nowhere to be found. But I go out there, and I got in the habit of calling them. I talk to them. I say, come on, come here, dear. And I shake the bucket, or I just call their name. I just call them, just come here, dear. Come on. And they hear my voice, and they come running from all over the place. And I know they're not sheep, and I can't handle them and tend to them, but I assure you, when I walk out there and they hear my voice, here they come. And even sometimes I'll see one that I don't recognize there, and I know they probably were raised on my property. They just wandered off, and they come in when they want. But I will say, as they look at me and they kind of get scared and start running, I'll speak, and they'll calm down because they know that it's me. I'm the guy that's been feeding them all these years. Now, my wife, I don't know what she does when she feeds them. She'll go feed them when I'm not there. But I know if I have someone with me, they'll stay backed off. In fact, we had some visitors not too long ago, and it was Rob Whitaker and his family, and I said, well, let me go feed the deer and see if they'll come in. And so I walk out there and, come here, deer, and I start shaking the corn, and the deer were half the length of this building away from me. They so standoffish. Normally they're at my feet. They literally come up and eat at my feet while I'm standing there. And I'm like, I don't understand. Why are they so standoffish? They were all in a line and they were just looking at me. I'm like, I don't know. And I put out the feed and I turn around. Here's Rob and his whole family out there, all at the front of the house, looking at these deer. And the deer like, I don't know what's going on, but that's not normal. So these deer, they know my voice because they hear it every day. They trust me because I bring them life-giving sustenance. I take food to them and I feed them every single day. I know they could live off the land. They could do whatever. They get plenty of food all around because a lot of people feed them out there. But they listen to the voice. They hear my voice every single day. And because of that, they know my voice. So my question is, do we listen to the voice of Jesus every day? Recently, I challenged the congregation. The Southwest congregation used to do this, and I started this recently within the last 5 months or so. I started challenging the congregation. I want to see a show of hands of everybody that reads their Bible every single day. And so everybody raises their hand, and we keep a number on the board. I have a young man in the back that he gets up and he counts everybody, and he puts that number on the board. And out of all of our members, this is our attendance, right? 36 in Bible class, 44 in worship, 37, 37. Okay, so how many of those, of that number, do you think is daily Bible readers? How many today can raise your hand? Let me see a show of hands and how many of you are daily Bible. You literally read your Bible every single day. Okay, so we have a few, right? Not everybody, because some of you are like, well, you know what, I don't think I read it yesterday, or I did. And we have people in our congregation say, man, I'm a daily reader, but I fell asleep Thursday and I never got to read my Bible. Just read a verse when you wake up in the morning. I'm not talking about reading a chapter or reading a whole book. Just read your Bible. Okay, so the numbers weren't close to that number, and neither are ours. Our numbers on our attendance are around between 75 and 85 on our attendance on a Sunday morning. And on our board over here, where we have the daily Bible readers, it's 26 or 27. Are you hearing the voice of Jesus? Are you listening to the voice of the shepherd? You're not going to hear it from laying in your bed from osmosis. You're not going to say, okay, well, Jesus, what's your opinion on this? And wait for a voice is not going to come. It doesn't come like that. We've got to get into the Word of God until the Word of God gets into us. And this is what this is talking about. So we need to hear the voice of God, hear Jesus' voice. Make it a point to find something He has said to benefit our day. Consider this, how many people pipe worldly ideas and worldly teachings into their minds every single day, become sheep gone astray as they begin to wander from the flock, following after a hireling instead of after the good shepherd. What about people, the good shepherd, what about the good shepherd knowing his sheep? What about that concept? Many people believe they can dance to the beat of their own drum, so to speak, their own followings, their own teachings, left the fold of God, and they're no longer doing the will of the Father. You hear this often. How are you doing? Good. How's the congregation there? Well, we're doing okay. One of our members, went off the deep end. They started following this group, and they took some people with them. Or you hear about this group, they had a split. Why? What happened? Well, they had somebody that started teaching some false teaching, and he started gaining a following. He's a hireling, and he's taking the sheep. He's sheep stealers. He's taking the sheep away from the flock and taking them somewhere else. He may even be the butcher. Scary thought. So Matthew chapter 7 and verse 21, and we saw this last night. Matthew chapter 7 verse 21. Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. It's unfortunate that there are among the sheep some who look like sheep, they act like sheep around the flock, but they are nothing more than wolves in sheep's clothing. And we see this concept in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 15. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 15, beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. We may not know who they are, but the good shepherd can spot them a mile away. And you think about that, and sometimes you have your suspicions about somebody. You don't want to think bad about somebody, but you're like, they're just not doing what they're supposed to be doing. I don't feel right calling them out, but that's just not right. And in Bible class, you may say, brother, that comment was not correct. And the scripture says that this is what is right, and you're teaching something false. And we try to keep people straight, or try to keep ourselves straight, and want to do what God's will is. But there are some of those that are wolves in sheep's clothing. Beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Matthew 7, verse 15. We may not know, again, who they are. False prophets are false teachers, and we may convince ourselves that this group only consists of those teaching those radical anti-Christian doctrine. The truth is they're out there. They're our friends, they're our neighbors, maybe even our family members who come to us with a strong faith, a strong moral disposition. Maybe they're pillars in the community. Ever hear somebody say that? Oh man, he's a great guy, strong guy. He'd make a good convert. Really? How does that work? When you think about this, there are people that are within us. I remember a chapel lesson from when I was in preaching school, and I don't remember many of them, but I remember one of them in particular. And it was a brother from India that taught a lesson, and he was very difficult to understand because of his strong accent, but he was very profound and very studious. And he's talking about, and I don't remember everything about the lesson, but the one thing I do remember is he says, you plant the garden and you nurture the garden and you grow up the garden and you put a fence around it, but then the fence consumes the garden. And what is he talking about? I know exactly what he's talking about. It's those that are within the church that consume the church. And we're worried about the outward. We're worried about protecting the wolves, wherein the protection we put up is what's destroying the flock. So it's interesting to think about that attitude. There's sometimes people with godly attributes appear to want to serve God but refuse to see the truth before them. They bring in damnable doctrines, heresies. They're teaching doctrines that lead people away from the truth and away from the kingdom, and we have to be careful from them. I was in a congregation. Darla and I went and preached at a congregation. I went and preached. She went with me. She was my driver, went everywhere. And I went to this congregation to visit. We didn't go to preach. Went to visit. And we get in the car, and she said, do those people seem kind of standoffish to you? Yeah. It's a sound congregation, and we went there because it was a sound congregation, and there was nothing but liberal congregations around, so we went to the sound congregation. So later we were in the area again, and we go there again. And we get in the car, and it's like, I don't know, these people just don't seem very friendly. I just don't get it. I can't put my finger on it. Well, we were visiting our brother when we were there. So next time we go to visit our brother, well, we're going to go to that congregation again because they're sound and they teach the truth. And the preacher was nice, and one of the elders talked to it, but for the most part, they were real standoffish. The third time we went there, it wasn't like that. The third time we went there, it was like we had been there 1,000 times. They called us by name. They come here, sit down. They treat us like, man, we get in the car, and my wife says, I am so confused. I said, right? What is that? I mean, like, the last 2 times we were here, they treated us like we were trying to rob them or something. And now they're treating us like we're family. You know what it was? They had their wolf guards up. They were in a community where anybody that comes in is suspect. Watch out, they may be coming in as wolves to come among the sheep. And the elders had the wolf guards up, and they didn't accept you in right away. They didn't embrace you right away just because you said you're from the Church of Christ. They didn't embrace you until they started getting to know you and find out he is solid. And they probably asked around, do you know this guy, Jim Ward? You ever heard of him? Oh, yeah, I know him. I know him. And so it was very interesting. And I thought, that's a lesson to take with me for the rest of my life. And now as I serve as an elder in the congregation, I have to be careful who we just embrace. And we've even had some people come in and they blend in and they fit in with the congregation. They become members, and then they'll say some things like, wait, that's not quite right. You need to look into the scriptures, and we have to teach and make sure that the truth is being taught. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 1. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 1. But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privately shall bring in damnable heresies, and denying the Lord that brought them, and bring upon themselves swift destructions. If we know the shepherd's voice, we won't be deceived by them. We will know and pick up on it right away. You ever be sitting in a Bible class and somebody says something and you start seeing heads going, you hear it and you look up like, what was that? Like, no, that wasn't right. And everybody caught it. So we know we're good. We know the shepherd's voice. John chapter 14 and verse 6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. We won't follow the false teachers if we study to know the good shepherd's voice. Many won't do that. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 2. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 2. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of the truth shall be evil spoken of. In John chapter 10 verse 14, Jesus saying, I know my sheep and they know me. The sheep are those that are his. They are his. They belong to him. They've been purchased by his blood. Do you belong to Jesus? Have you turned your life over to him? It's interesting that when I search my library for information on the shepherd, I found that there is a vast amount of information out there concerning being a shepherd. That's shepherding the flock as an elder. But there's not a lot of information in the brotherhood on following the shepherd. Fortunately, the Bible has much to say about being a sheep, much more to say about being a sheep than about being a shepherd. So we have the Bible to turn to. What does being a sheep imply? It implies that we need to be followers of Christ. In a world where we strive to be leaders, being a follower is foreign to many people, especially men. I'm not no follower. You ever work with other men that are all type A, alpha type personalities? Clash and fight. It's difficult sometimes. I remember speaking with a Bible student once who had just gotten into preaching school. I asked him how it was going. He was ex-military. He had just gotten out of the military a year or so before. And he said, these students they're like soldiers without a leader. He said, I finally got tired of all the chaos and I took control. They just needed someone to push them. And he said, I stepped up and started that process. They have no drive. I thought about that for a second. I said, you drive cattle, but you lead sheep. That's the truth. Sheep have to be led. We need to be able to listen to the Good Shepherd voice and follow him. There's an intimate relationship between the shepherd and the sheep. But what kind of relationship do you have with the Good Shepherd? And is it one of a personal nature? Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? At the risk of sounding new wave denominational, I have to say we really do need to have a personal relationship with Jesus. Or do we really know him? And you think about this whole meeting here about knowing who the Lord is and him knowing us. Read Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 through 36. Matthew 25, verse 34 through 36. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was a hungry, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Jesus is telling the righteous that they are righteous because they had his back. They took care of his sheep as though they were taking care of him. You ever dealt with someone on the phone before you meet them, and you deal with them and deal with them and deal with them, maybe for years, and then you finally meet them, and you have expectations. Feel like you've known them forever. Have you ever met someone and they talk to you like your long lost friends, and they walk away and you're like, who was that? I don't know who that guy is. You know him. Perhaps you've met them, but you left a greater impression on them than they left on you. When I was a kid, there was a family that lived behind us, and they were very, very poor. And they had chickens, and they had rabbits, and they had all kinds of sheep, and all kinds of animals. And they would right there in town. We lived in town, and they would butcher those animals. And I'd go over there and help them. And their youngest son was about 3 years older than me. His name was John. And I got to be close to the family. I sat at their table many times because she was like Mama Walton. She had all these kids, and everybody's welcome. If you were there when it was supper time, she's putting a plate at the table or lunch or whatever. You're going to eat with them, and they would eat rabbit and they would eat chicken and whatever that they grew. And the dad didn't make much money, and so we were very close, and we spent a lot of summers together, running and jumping and playing and stuff like that. John's family moved out in the country when he was in high school. I was still in junior high, and by the time I got to high school, he was wrapped up in everything that a high school student gets wrapped up in: his studies and friends, and he was still cordial to me, and we would talk sometimes. But after he graduated and moved away, I didn't see him for many, many years. I kind of forgot about John as I grew up and went about my own life and went about doing my own thing. And then one year, about 10 years after I got out of high school, my wife and myself and my brother-in-law, we went to the zoo in San Antonio, and my son, I guess, was very, very small or just born. I don't know, just when my son was born, little, and we were going to take him to the zoo. And so we go to the zoo, and we're walking around, we're looking at all these animals, and I look up, and there's a guy walking. He's got these two girls, one on either side, and he's walking along, and they're talking and laughing, and he turns, and I'm like, that's John. That is John. I recognize him anywhere. That's John. And I walk up to him. I said, John, how are you? And he turns around and he says, I'm fine. Who are you? And I said, I'm Jim Word. I used to live across the lot from you. We ran around in the summers together. And he goes, I remember Jim Word. Nope, I don't think you're him. And my wife and my family are like, have you lost it? Just walk up and talk to him. She's like, yeah, I don't think you're him. Well, I am him. You want to see my driver's license? I'm him. He did not know me. Like, I have no idea who you are. I'm sorry. And walked off. Like, okay. I knew him, but he didn't know me. Perhaps if I had made an effort to stay in contact all those years, maybe we'd have known each other. He'd have known me. But don't just keep Jesus in your memory. You have to keep him in your life and keep your relationship with Jesus active all the time. It's very important in order for him to know you and for you to know him. Matthew 7, verse 23. Are we about out of time? You still good? I'm right at the end. I'm good. Matthew 7, 23. And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. If we're gonna know Jesus and he's the shepherd and we're the sheep, we need to know his voice. We need to know that the teaching comes from him, that when we hear something, we need to know that is him and that is he is our shepherd and he is the one that we follow. And so that being said, that's all of my lessons. Anybody have any questions or any comments that you'd like to make? None? Okay, thank you all very much for your time.